It's not weird that I would say like shit every 30 seconds. It's weirder that I would like just turn into, we're in third grade and I'm saying sugar.
Okay, let's do this.
They don't know what I know.
Welcome back to another Engineering podcast. I'm Adam.
I'm Brian.
And I'm Mike.
Yay!
Yay! Right? I think you're our first repeat guest.
Really? That's exciting.
Damn, our first guest and our first repeat guest.
Ha! Good. Just bring me back. Every time something needs to change drastically, let me know.
So welcome, welcome to you, Mike, but also welcome to all of our new listeners. We're still growing every week, so I feel like I got to be like, hey, welcome to the new 6 people that are listening to us. If you're new here, Mike's been a guest in the past. He's an old buddy of ours from way back, who is, for his day job, a screenwriter. But once again, we're not going to talk about that.
No. That was terrible.
None of us want to talk about our job.
Yeah, that's a reasonable thing to do.
I'm doing this to not be doing my day job. But, day jobs aside, I'm trying to think how to intro this in a good way. We're here to talk about arguments, not to have arguments, but to talk about argument. How did we get to that as a topic that we were all like, we all want to talk about this?
My interest in argument is that I basically studied the damn thing. Like in college, my major was Rhetorical Theory and Semantics, which is something that we talked about.
Wow.
The three of us briefly in high school. We kind of like diverted away from the usual curriculum and started talking about argument instead. And my major was about the study of words, the study of kind of persuasive language, and also just the study of like almost treating words in discussion like math. Like, does stuff actually compute? Does the thing that you're saying actually do what you say it says, or is it a big pile of crap?
Well, what I think is funny about the background that the three of us have, you studied this, like you just said, like sort of mechanically, right? Like here's almost like the programming language like structure of how you put together rhetorical arguments, right?
Yeah.
Like using words to walk people through ideas to try to make a point at the end. I studied philosophy, which is kind of just the application of that to really crazy ideas.
Yeah, and I would say the difference there is the stuff that I looked at is more of like the history of why the words can do that at all.
What I think is interesting related to the third background in this conversation, that being Brian, your background as an engineer and a programmer.
Anti-words.
Like yeah, exactly, right? You come from like numbers and programming, and like it's funny because we're talking about essentially like the idea that language is just words, right? And language and grammar and whatever are all just like the programming language of how I put my ideas in you. And and you get to this idea of there is a set that you study when you study rhetoric of very common bad arguments. And they're not like arguments that people disagree with. They're bad arguments. If you use this structure to try to prove your point, you're wrong.
You're doing it wrong.
They're not facts or points or positions. They're like the way you make a position. That's the distinction, right? It's not like I disagree with you that the orange is orange. I think it's blue. It's not that. It's like, how do I talk to you intelligently about oranges and colors?
But it's an interesting thing to talk about in general because we live in a time of multiple mediums of discussion, multiple attempts to relay your own ideas and do so in a way that is not only persuasive for the other person, but also clear in your intention. And I think that because clarity is in the eye of the beholder these days, talking about what actual clarity is sort of a fun discussion to have. Like we don't. There's no such thing as a stupid question, but there's plenty of stupid arguments, and we've kind of decided that there aren't. And people don't know how to do it anymore.
I think this also speaks to one of the bigger issues with debate in modern times, which is that we tend to just hate on each other rather than actually discuss the issues, because things have been shortened to sound bites on the internet. And when you look at a lot of the uh, issues, a lot of these logical fallacies that we're going to get to, they kind of point to that. A lot of logical fallacies just result in people getting pissed at each other because they're like, for instance, personal attacks, which is some sort of Latin term for that. But if we can identify those and not do that stuff anymore, people can just have reasonable conversations.
And so
They are key.
so then to take it to that place of like why it's relevant today gets it to why it's a relevant topic for our world of engineering, right? Like as people are more and more and more connected, there's more and more and more communication. And for guys like us that have sort of paid attention to not just like how to make a point, but like how to structure your point so that it's effective. Like I spend so much time watching people, and like I don't remember the names of the logical fallacies, but I notice when somebody puts together a bad argument and I go, oh, that has nothing to do with the conversation. And then I'm like, do I try to explain that? Or do I just like, and it just, and it happens more and more and more, the more communication there is, right? So it's like, it's this conversation about the state of conversation today, the state of argument today, how to improve it in like a nonpartisan way.
Well, yeah, and I mean, like when we talk about citrus, because like for the most part, this stuff is what you could kind of easily call the journey to fuck you, which is basically like how much discussion would you have with somebody before they just say fuck you and they leave? And it's pretty quick, especially when you're basically saying the thing they're doing doesn't work. But I think that ideally, the person who just said fuck you and walked away, ideally, whether you agree with their position or not, ideally they think about what you said, or at least like have an interest in making the point they tried to make clear, as opposed to doing the version that they think is the only version to make an argument. Like, you know, you brought up personal attacks, which is, you know, categorized into ad hominem, and we can go into more of a formal version of that in a second. But like, you know, that is a tried and true strategy, is that I'm right because you're an idiot, you know? And that doesn't really make the point you want to make. It's sort of what most conversations come down to these days. Yeah. But I think it's worthwhile discussing why that doesn't really work, and also trying to encourage people to be persuasive with what they're saying without necessarily getting too angry, like emotionally involved about it.
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting because like we talk about the times in which we live, and we can go into greater detail if we want to. But I think the biggest problem is that we don't do a lot of talking. We don't do a lot of talking with people that we don't agree with past fuck you. Right. And I think because it's so wonky out there these days, and wonky is indeed a technical term, it's important to embrace a version of discussion where we can actually figure out what people that disagree with you are thinking and why, and trying to either come to some sort of conclusion. You know, you can agree to disagree all you want, but there's also a version in which we kind of realize that we do agree on some fundamental things, and that is the only place to actually repair a division, is to start with something that people agree on and really understand why people feel certain ways. Because it's very easy to say, I disagree with you because you're dumb. And very often that can be the case. But it makes a lot more sense to try to figure out what the other person's point actually is, to better explain what your point is, and see if one of you can you know, change your mind ever so slightly without thinking of it as some sort of defeat. You know, it's not a zero-sum game. People don't necessarily have to win arguments. That's the kind of screwy thing with the way we talk about it. Winning arguments is a thing. It really shouldn't be. It should be more like, I'm making my argument, you're making your argument, so between us, what's the truth? You know?
There's a lot to that I think should be sort of redefined like the words we use, arguments,
Cheese.
and debate and cheese and other snack foods.
Cheese is
And-
like cheese is a very specific thing, and I've seen on menus some bullshit. It's not fucking cheese.
It's those really stinky cheeses that I still can't tolerate.
No, I'll tell you what.
I love sticky cheeses.
I'm with Carpenter on this one because the stinky cheese. First of all, by the way, we are right on topic right now. But the stinky cheese is not meant to be consumed by itself. Only a fucking animal is gonna eat, like a Roquefort cheese, a super funky cheese by itself. It's supposed to go with like 9 other things, and those 9 other things all like cut the funkiness of the cheese. Like most funky cheese is supposed to be enjoyed with a funky wine, and otherwise it's just fear factor.
And like nuts and honey.
Nuts and honey.
You're wrong.
Quince mustard.
You're wrong because you're ugly.
Well, there you go. See, what we're learning so far is that it's a very...
You're wrong because I saw someone eat cheese without other things the other day.
Both of those are wrong.
In response to your wonderful summary there, Rosolio, of the situation, I think just the general approach. I agree with you. I think the general approach people take to conversation sucks these days. Everyone comes in with the... Like, everyone thinks discussing things is arguing, which it's not. It's just discussing things. You think it's arguing because I disagree with you and you get upset. And I do the same thing.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't use that word anymore. It's not an argument. We're just sharing.
Oh.
And along those lines, like, I shouldn't, if I'm, the further away someone's viewpoint is from mine, the less I should expect to change their mind.
Right.
And so if I come into this kind of with like a Jesus perspective on conversation, I should just come in expecting to share. I'm not here to change your mind. I just want to tell you how I feel and what I think I know.
But even beyond that, I think that it's less about changing someone's mind as it is about understanding them.
Mm-hmm.
Because, people can share all they want. Just sharing to have yourself heard is kind of selfish. It's just like, I want everyone to hear what I'm thinking. That's kind of what the entire internet is. But but I think that there is a requirement of people, especially if you live in a modern time where people disagree with other people. They disagree with other pretty drastically, and they come into a discussion in a very combative place. But Jones, you're right. If you talk to somebody who disagrees entirely with you, such as Adam does with the stinky cheese, it is less about him trying to tell you why you should enjoy stinky cheese, so much as explaining why he enjoys stinky cheese, and that will allow you to make your own determination on it. Because your goal is not to convert the world into non-stinky cheese eating people. Your goal is to decide for yourself kind of what your own opinion is, and decide for yourself with all the possible relevant information. And you can't get the relevant information if people yelling fuck you all the time. 2 things come to mind. First of all, something I know very near and dear to Adam's heart is the argument clinic. The very famous, brilliant, amazing
No.
Python sketch in which Michael Palin goes into the office for an argument. And the argument is just contradiction. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. I told you once. No, you haven't. Yes, I have. And it's funny. It's ridiculous. But that is the opposite of where this whole thing is supposed to go. The other thing I always bring up, and I brought this up probably in the sports podcast, is about a really very popular show on ESPN called Pardon the Interruption. And I'll make this quick. Pardon the Interruption is sort of responsible for everything bad in television argument, because it's 2 guys, and they have lists of topics down the side, and they basically often will take opposite sides and kind of yell at each other about what's going on. In fact, like, there's a great 30 Rock joke where they called that show Sports Yelling, and it's just like 5 different, like, it's like a screen split 11 ways. Everyone just yelling at the top of their lungs. But what people missed about why that show works, or Pardon the Interruption works, versus the way that all this other stuff is just sort of yelling, chaos, is that show is 2 really good friends that like to discuss sports. Often they'll take opposite stances, but they are there to discuss. They are there to understand. They're not there to shout at each other. And stupid people see that and just see the yelling. They don't see the relationship, and they don't see the point, and they don't see the fact that over the thousands of episodes of the show, it's been on for like 15 years, they've changed their minds, and they've come to different conclusions about things. Not because someone yelled them into submission on it, but because they've understood the other person's stance over a long period of time, and they start to question their own thing without yielding, without losing, without somehow screwing it up. And the bottom line is that we put so much of a emphasis on the like team sport version of argument that we end up using all of these like plays. It's just like it's like a football play.
Totally.
And
how do I trick people? How do I trip them up?
How do I trip them up? And the issue is that they don't actually do what you think they do, which is where you get into fallacy. That's what they are. Fallacies are those plays.
Make you feel like you did.
Yeah.
They make like feel like you won.
You get to walk away. So this is the funny thing. This is why it's worth knowing the fallacies, I feel like, if only for personal benefit.
Yeah.
Which is, there are situations where that person is walking away going, I feel like I won. And you can be like, no. You know that they didn't because you understand the fallacious argument. But then I also never find that to be particularly satisfying for myself. Because then I just want to try to explain the thing to them, and then
fuck you.
Not gonna be helpful. Well, it's tough because the situation where you end up having to describe a logical fallacy in someone else's opinion or someone else's argument only comes up in a situation where you're like already arguing with someone where you want to win and they want to win, and you're both trying to convince the other person of like your agenda. I think if we were brought up in an environment where debate style conversation were standard in normal things, and you're encouraged to constantly be debating even on things that you agree with somebody, we'd have less of a tough time with these emotional issues because now you only have real debates with people when they disagree with you. That's a horrible place to start.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the struggle is to present an answer to anything someone says that actually contains substance. You kind of have to, like, my goal is always to try to contain a little bit of what they said in whatever I'm gonna say, which then forces me to listen. Like, the hardest part of this whole thing, I think, it's hard for me, and I have a lot of practice at this, is to not just start formulating your response the second you hear the first thing you can have a response to, right? Like, as soon as you get to the talking point that you have heard someone on TV shout about before, you go, fuck it, I got it. And then you're just like queued up, waiting for them to finish talking, right?
It's hard if you don't have a notepad right there while the other person's talking.
Yeah.
Because the right way to handle it would be like, what else? What else do you want to share? Let me get these notes down so I can respond in due time.
You know what's interesting also? I think based on what you're saying, a very important way to approach the discussion of fallacy is not to identify the fallacy in someone else's argument, but to avoid the fallacy yourself in your argument. Because what you learn is there, back to the plays thing and back to the idea of like the combative nature of this. We're so inundated with just screwed up argument that doesn't actually make any sense that when someone makes a real argument, people are kind of out of game shape. You know, like people are sort of it's a lot harder to contradict and to dig in on a good argument than it is one of these ones that has a flaw in it. So. Yeah. The importance of knowing fallacy is not only knowing the flaws of other people's opinions, but primarily the flaws in the way you do it. Because if you do it devoid of fallacy, then, you know, if you want to talk about a world of upper hand and lower hand, whatever's underneath the upper hand, I guess
Sinister left hand,
another hand,
the third hand,
then you will find yourself in a place of actually making your point, and a real point. I think that's what Cicero was thinking when he kind of came up with all this crap. Is a real point is really hard to defend, and a real point is really hard to deal with, which is why they can be so powerful, and why you only find yourself with your real point if you stress test it against these very, very common and very, very effective fallacies.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a deeper component in modern day issues, which I'm not sure is really the topic of this cast, but the idea that a lot of the stuff that I think we're probably all thinking in the back of our heads right now is like a constant argument topic in society, they're really they're really big, broad issues without real answers to questions. And so people start to debate something. I don't know if this fits in as like a logical fallacy. Maybe we'll get to it. But like, if you're debating something that's too broad to debate, like where you can't bring in specific facts to argue a point, or your point is just really generic and vague, people argue over stuff like that all the time. And you can't debate that. You can't debate like, what's the air made of? Like, that's a hard thing to debate.
In that context, if you ever feel like you won, you fucked up, because that conversation never is over, right? It's like if you're talking about the value of human life and you have a thing that you want to end with blah 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 period, like you just shut down a conversation that will continue forever as long as there is human life. Like there's no finite, I just won, here's a meme in your face, we're done here. Like
no memes.
The point that's lost is like you don't win a conversation. The goal in a conversation is to sustain it and keep it going. And so we have this idea of like it, when you combine that with this sports thing, right? Where it's like the clock ran out and I got the last score, so I win. Like we have this culture now of I was the last person to shout, so I must be the winner.
Right.
And it's like,
well,
you don't.
Off of what you just said, I think that the biggest problem, the most common fallacy, without question, is a hasty generalization. And the reason why hasty generalization is so common is that everyone's in a big goddamn hurry, and everyone only has so much time to read something or hear something, and the people that are doing the yelling, they know that. So you only have so much time to make your point, and it's pretty difficult to go into the extremely nitty-gritty issues of the issue, like an issue such as the one that's currently going on right now involving immigration and things like that. It is definitely not a short conversation. However, all the conversations being had about it are extremely short. And what that does is, regardless of whether it is humane, regardless of whether it is safe, regardless of whether it's any of these things that people kind of making arguments on each side would say, it's not a good argument. It's probably not going to be a good argument because it's quick. And you can't treat a complicated topic quickly without immediately trying to overgeneralize and immediately trying to put yourself in the position of like, we're almost doomed to avoid having a real conversation about it, things like that.
I have a fun example from today. I was browsing Facebook, as I would almost rather probably never do, but can't help sometimes. And I came across a post by someone that I'm friends with on the internet, who I may or may not be related to. And the post was just a meme that I think said, like something like, "Hey, Starbucks, how about you hire 10,000 veterans instead?" In response to Starbucks saying they're going to hire like 10,000 refugees or something like that. And as I do often, I like kind of started to write a response, mostly for myself, knowing I'm not going to post like an angry response to a good friend necessarily very often in public on the internet. And immediately you go from this really simple like meme that's clearly related to something that just happened in the news media and seems simple. And within like 5 sentences of writing a response for myself, I realized, well, this is actually talking about like 25 different issues.
Yeah.
All complex and all driving each other. And so I ended up getting in this loop about, well, wait, we have veterans because we send them to war in the Middle East, and the Middle East causes refugees, and then we're back to more veterans, and then wait, who should we be hiring here? And it's just, I bring it up as an example of that exact point, that all of this stuff that we're so polarized on, and that people in general, like I think through arguments that I have with close friends here and with my fiance and with my parents, and it's always something that's really complicated that there's not an easy answer to. And if you approach it with anger and like this frustration at the other person's perspective, you're just fucking everyone. And I'm so tired of everyone feeling like they're getting fucked because we're having a conversation.
Well, one thing that's interesting that I think is important also about this is that what your friend said on the internet about, well, why don't you hire veterans instead of hiring, was it refugees or immigrants? Is that what he said?
Immigrants. It was in reference. Yeah, same thing.
So that retaliatory statement would be is basically saying that there are two teams. One team are veterans and one team are immigrants, right? Because that's what that is what is being said there. It's not. It's saying that like, if you're doing this with this team, why don't you do it with my team? You know, one of the incredibly wonky, screwed up arguments of our time is the all lives matter thing, and even necessarily going towards blue lives matter. Black lives matter, I think, is not saying only Black lives matter. It's saying that all
other lives don't matter, right? Like it's not a binary statement.
It's not a binary statement. And that is, you know, a false dilemma. That is that situation of we have two options. Only one of them can be true. The thing about
one of the logical fallacies, right? Assuming something that someone didn't say. This is what you're doing when you interpret Black Lives Matter incorrectly. You're assuming that they mean.
Yes, but most specifically, it's the false dilemma, which is basically saying one of these two things. You create a situation where only two things can be true.
Yeah.
And if one is not true, then the other one has to be true, which is of course jacked up. But that's saying if either Chipotle is open or another restaurant is open, but they can't both be open, which is a ludicrous thing to say. And I'm bringing up Chipotle because I'm hungry. To me, the importance and significance of Black Lives Matter is that a group of people in this country for a very, very long time have been statistics. The town we come from has this. So we're from Baltimore, and there's this thing in City Paper called Murder Inc. And in Murder Inc., they do this thing where they have a little big map of the city, and they have a little pin drop, and they explain every single murder that has taken place over the entire year. And they do it every single time because so often there's so many murders. I mean, like 300 murders in a year. They don't seem like people. They seem like individual stats. And it's not a coincidence that, especially in the city we come from, 90% of the people that die are young Black men. And when it's that group of people, it becomes a stat. It becomes just another part of a quote unquote problem. And the reality is, these are people. These are people that matter as much as everybody else. It's not saying they're the only people that matter. And the opposition to Black Lives Matter, the fact that the stance they're taking is, look, you're wrong because other things matter too, completely misses the point of what's going on. And completely misses the point of what it is. The argument is not we matter more than you, it's that we matter at all. And, that is also... That is another fallacy, sort of flimsily, but close to it, is the idea of straw man. Straw man is one of the oldest and sort of simplest fallacies in the book, and that is if I want to argue with Kirkman about stinky cheese, I just take a portion of your argument and argue against that part instead. Like if you if you mention how you had a certain kind of wine at one point, I just go after that wine. And they call it a straw man because it's like you ever see a dog attack somebody? You have a dog attack the stuffed person, not the real person. The dog's still ripping something up. The dog thinks it's getting somewhere, but that's part of the issue overall, is that we are so conditioned to adversarially contradict someone else's argument that we are willing to somehow misread it to think it means something else entirely. And then, turn the person we're talking to into the bad guy using a stance that they're not even taking. And I think that is probably the most pervasive one of all of right now, is that we spend so much time arguing with versions of people's beliefs that they don't even necessarily believe. Yeah. We just pick the part that is easiest to go after, and that's when people are yelling. It's almost like, it's like we each have a little, scarecrow next to us, and we're just punching each other's scarecrow over and over again, and wondering if the other person's not getting knocked out or getting tired. We just tire ourselves punching that.
I think it comes back to the core of all this is it comes back to the idea of coming in with a goal and wanting to win, and that sucks. That's not the point of conversation.
Like we need to. The mic drop shouldn't be a celebrated thing, right? Like the person that puts up that meme, like they're having this feeling like, oh snap, I just showed the world. And it's like, oh, no, oh God, that didn't, it's like, great. You just created team veteran versus team refugee and a world where if I have any answer to this, that I lose.
Right.
Just
Well,
because you created a world where I can't win
yeah.
So
doesn't mean that you win.
So here's a I think we're kind of circling on the same conversation here a little bit. We're certainly all in agreement. How do we apply? So what we've kind of discussed up to this point has been sort of how do I handle a discussion with a dude at the bar who I'm arguing with over like a topic that's important to me and important to him. How do we apply this in the context of, I guess there are two things we could talk about. We could either talk about like, what do I do when I'm actually trying to push an agenda? I want people to understand my perspective, to change theirs. Say it's an important political issue. I want them to take a different stance on climate change or immigration or economics, right? How do I do it in the sense of like the modern world right now, Facebook, friends, groups? And I guess maybe more importantly, how should people in charge do this? How should like politicians be having these arguments? Because you can't fall back on the idea. We kind of all came to the conclusion here, well, you shouldn't come in with a goal in mind and you should be respectful and yada yada, but you do have a goal. If you're an elected politician, your goal is to sway votes. That's your only purpose, right? So what are you supposed to do then in this?
I think the answer is you have to make sure that the thing you're talking about is the thing you're talking about, and make sure that the argument you are making is specifically revolving around your point. Like, there's so many other things people will throw in there to sort of grease the wheels a little bit and to make it a little bit more palatable and make it a little more understanding, and it also to sway people's opinions outside of the actual argument. I mean, like, speaking of politicians, there's usually doomsday scenarios brought up quite often. If you do this, then this is going to happen. And it's,
I do that all the time.
Of course, it works. It scares people.
The world's going to come to an end if you don't do this. Come on.
It scares people, and I think that what you have to do is recognize when you do that, and refocus. Make sure that you're focusing the point you're trying to make on the actual point you're trying to make, rather than these sort of little tricks, and recognizing other people when they're making those tricks. Not to go, aha, you just used post hoc ergo propter hoc, you fool. But being able to isolate that part of what they said from what they're actually saying, and try to force people to remain focused on what they claim their stance is. For example, climate change. We're doing this, guys. 95% of conversations about that tend to go away, or at least dissipate and like peter out into nothingness, because I am one of the extremely rare 98% of people who think it's a thing. You can kind of find yourself at a logjam when you realize that all the stuff you're saying about science is being completely ignored and rejected by the other person. Right? Like this is really what we're talking about as far as the use of the stuff, right, Jones?
Yeah.
Like, you're trying to have this argument with somebody, and you're saying science says this, and they go, but can you trust science?
But it's funded by the government, or it's funded by McDonald's.
Right.
Well,
here's an argument for why you can't trust science, right? So instead of having the conversation about the facts that you want to talk about, they're instead undermining the authority that you're trying to.
Right. And that's actually called an appeal to authority. The appeal to authority is when you have some sort of like, picture it like that game Primal Rage, the dinosaur Mortal Kombat game from like the mid-90s. You have a big dinosaur on your side, and they got a big dinosaur on your side, and our dinosaurs are gonna fight. Very often, in the case of the climate change conversation, on one side of the argument, the authority is science, and the other side, the authority is a religion or sort of like mystical belief of some kind. And the problem is, you're not really going to be able to change either person's mind about that part of it, because one people feel very strongly about, and the other people kind of study and logically understand. Why is everyone taking the class?
It's really hot in here.
My AC's turned off for
Happens all
sound
the time.
purposes.
You guys are get a fan,
Get-
dudes. You have a fan, Jones. What the hell's wrong with you?
Yeah, the fan is the problem. It blows
Oh,
the
okay. I see. Okay. So the case there. This is the question I posed to you, Jones, and also to you, Kirk, if because I only bring up Jones because he brought it up. Can you have a conversation about climate change without invoking complicated science or religion? If you can,
Not really.
You sure?
Kind of.
I think that's the reason why it's a problem, because you end up with these people that say, again, religion says one thing, science says the other, which is also a preposterous notion. That is where people get stuck. They get stuck because they end up on this sort of fundamental belief structure, whether it's grounded in fact or grounded in feeling, that is totally immovable. So now the conversation we're having about whether the weather is weird in Southern California, it's no longer about that. It's about whether your religion exists. and that's that's not having the argument you set out to have in the first place.
Wait, I want to chase this now because I feel like you just told me we can debate climate change without discussing science.
I'm saying that's the only way. That's the only way to have the conversation.
Try the other version of this argument, right?
Jeez.
Which is call
it a day.
The teachings of Christ, right? Like if you want to try to like on the other side of this kind of conversation is like where I'm going with it is if you don't believe that there is any God, then whether Christianity or Judaism or Islam has the right answer, like you can't even have the conversation because you don't believe in the fundamental tenet of a religious conversation, right? Climate change is inherently a scientific conversation. You don't win a scientific conversation by saying science doesn't exist. You just say, we can't have a conversation here.
Yeah, so it's like it's grounded in it has a foundation that by dismissing it, you just can't.
There is no conversation. Like you didn't win. You just said, yeah, that's not a thing.
I know,
right?
but right, and that's true academically. And that's true in terms of like what is a cogent, what is a good argument. We do exist in a world though where that is the sort of inevitable the inevitable end of the conversation at a certain point.
Right.
What's it called? You guys might actually know, and you may be better at Googling than I am, but like there's a thing called, maybe it's called like Gibson's Law or something. There's some like, or Gideon's Law. There's some term for the fact that eventually every single internet comment conversation will bring up Hitler. Godwin's Law. It's called Godwin's Law. It's a real thing. Hold on, let me look up.
I mean, I believe it. I see Hitler on the internet constantly.
Oh, here it is. All right, so Godwin's Law. Godwin's Law is an internet adage that is derived from one of the earliest bits of Usenet wisdoms, which goes, which every single conversation will eventually go to Hitler or the Nazis, and if it does, that's kind of the end of the conversation. So in a world where that's a thing, we have to, because we know what this stuff does, and we know how to actually put together an argument. If you talk to a person who's already going to say that science doesn't exist because of if someone's ever going to say science doesn't exist, you telling them that that's a bad argument is like you are beating the ever-loving shit out of a dead horse. So instead, there's I think an onus of creativity on people that understand argument, that people understand this thing, to be a little bit more creative and say, like, is there a way to have a conversation about climate change that doesn't challenge someone's religious belief or force them to feel like they're somehow altering their fundamental belief structure in order to at least possibly see your point? And the answer has to be yes. Because if the answer is no, then the world is truly going to end and we're all going to die.
That might be. I mean,
Yeah.
there's
no,
another
really, but, like,
sci-fi law along those lines that there's a great thing that kills every civilization. Maybe it's climate
filter.
change. The great filter, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Great filter. I would like to release.
Why we have not yet encountered another intelligent life form, because there's some great filter that like societies just don't get through.
Sure, but my point is that wouldn't that be interesting? Wouldn't it be interesting if someone got up on a dais and said something interesting about climate change that like that's the thing, is that you almost have to have that conversation about specific events and specific things, and basically have as much information to point to that doesn't just invalidate the other person's claim. You know what I mean? Like, for example, think about climate change. So we all live in Southern California. Kirkman and I live in probably the drier part. Is San Diego wetter than? Does it rain more where you are, Jones?
No, it's pretty damn dry here too.
Same.
So, like, one of the screwy arguments against climate change, when it basically didn't rain for 5 years, and then it rained a year's worth like 2 weeks ago, which ain't normal, is that just this shit is cyclical, and you want to be able to show the simple numbers and say it is getting warmer in Southern California. So let's just talk about this. Let's not we don't have to make some sort of grand declaration about weather. We just need to acknowledge. Let's talk about why this is happening right here, and if there's any possible corollary for it. I have a pretty good idea for the corollary, and now we're talking about what's actually going on rather than talking about what's been happening for 100 million years. You know, in like things like what's going on elsewhere in the country, it all kind of ends up with that. Is we end up. All right, I'm gonna bring up something else that's kind of nuts. You guys remember in high school when I would do that thing where I could connect any two actors for?
Kevin Bacon.
You do
it assembly.
Yeah, 6 degrees of anyone.
So I can still do that with anybody. And actually, when I was home over December, like someone's brother who I hadn't seen in like 15 years. I opened the door. I didn't even know who it was, and they go, Gwyneth Paltrow and Zac Efron. And I did it, by the way. The trick to that always was, at least was initially, I had this chain, and it was almost like it was a freeway. It was like, if you can get a person to the freeway, you can get anybody to the freeway. So all you gotta do is get them there, and you can drive over here, drive down this way, and go down, and you're there.
Beetlejuice or JFK?
Beetlejuice was the center of it, because Beetlejuice has a ton of people in it, and not only a ton of people in it, a ton of people that are in totally different kinds of movies. It has Gina Davis, it has Winona Ryder, it has Jeffrey Jones, it has Michael Keaton, it has Alec Baldwin, who were all in a lot of other things, a lot of people. I digress. The point is, our current school of argument is to make the thing that we're talking about something else that is irrefutable, and now you're not arguing anymore. That's why climate change hits the loggerhead, because the people who don't believe in it, they think that believing in that somehow contradicts religion. And whether that's true or not is sort of irrelevant, because if they're taking that stance, now it's like, well, you're just trying to trick me out of this larger thing. And there's a grand irony to it, because in Judeo-Christian theology, there's a lot of weird weather shit. You know, like there's plenty of weird stuff. So the concept is not ultimately foreign. It just, people are almost driving their own car into the place where they feel comfortable, and they feel comfortable they don't ever have to move from. You know, like all my sports related arguments about the football team that I root for. You're not going to change my mind that I like my football team more than other people like other football team. So if the conversation goes there, then we're not talking about anything anymore. We're just sitting there with our arms folded, saying what we think, and then leaving pissed off about it. Or worse yet, leaving go, I really showed him.
Yeah.
How was that?
Yeah, I think kind of what you're saying there, if I can try to sum it up, is that it kind of goes back to the goal of the conversation is not to prove right or wrong. It's not an absolute thing. It's to Why are you talking to another human if you already know that everything you're saying is provable?
Right.
And you don't need to prove the whole thing. You could talk to somebody about how smelly it is when your car is turned on when you stand by the tailpipe. That's just like, it's anecdotal at the moment, but it's a perception. It's a human condition statement. It's just to give someone a sense of why you believe your thing, more so than just, hey, here's a number. This is absolutely irrefutable.
Yeah, and I think that, not only, like, what you said is really important. It's not only going into an argument to win, it's going into an argument to not lose. And that is an even screwier position to start from, because I mean, it's like
subtle difference.
It's a big difference.
Yeah,
I think it's a big difference, because when you go into an argument to win, you are at least putting yourself out there and making an effort. Okay, snowball fights. All right, snowball fight.
Yep.
There are two ways to win a snowball fight. Make a lot of snowballs and try to hit the other person, or make it so the other person can't hit you. And that's building your big sort of like, your little igloo around yourself. You build your trench. If you really, really, really don't want to get hit by a snowball, you can go inside. You didn't win the snowball fight. You just went inside. As opposed to playing to win, which is, I'm going to make the snowballs and charge. I'm going to go after your fort and try to get you. I think that we almost need to stop pretending like going inside is winning. It's not winning. It's avoiding losing. Yeah. But even then, you're not gotten anywhere. You're back inside and you're having fun.
But you also got to think more broadly about, a snowball fight is a perfect analogy because the point is just to have fun anyway. So like, you can also win a snowball fight by walking over to the person you're playing with, slamming their face in the snow, so they start crying and they go home to their mom. And then you're alone, standing in the snow, not having a snowball fight anymore. Like, the point is to have fun with, like, you want the fight to keep going, or else you're not having a snowball fight.
And getting hit by a snowball, it's kind of fun.
I think the problem that this makes me realize, because you're comparing debate all of a sudden to like trench warfare,
right,
is that when people are typically discussing these topics that people are very passionate about, but at that given moment they don't really have anything to lose or win other than the argument. It's not like debating climate change right now. If I win, I'm saving the planet. If I lose, the planet goes up in flames. It's just a conversation at a bar. Same thing with the snowball fight, right? If I hide in my fort, I don't lose. I don't get hit by a snowball. If I charge your fort and win, I don't win a war. We still end up going inside and having hot chocolate later. So there's a necessary piece of like urgency around conversations to make them functional.
Good
like
point.
the person has to die if they lose, or something prolific has to happen if they win, or else maybe everyone should just chill the fuck out a little bit. Maybe that's the solution to that.
It's such an important point, especially when you talk about the unsolvable problems, the things that are the arguments that are so big. It's like, where do you even start? Mm-hmm. You're right. There's no urgency in talking about immigration in America because it's not something that lives or dies over one day. Although people are starting making an effort to do that. It is something that is so big and so broad and so multi-layered and so requiring a lot of people to talk to bring in and talk about, and a lot of people who do have a lot more at stake than the people just kind of academically talking about it. That we almost get bored and are like, it's too big. I just want to go inside and have a chocolate.
Right.
So you're right. In order to have the conversation really, we have to treat these things like slightly more pressing issues. Otherwise, you'll never leave your own comfort zone and talk about it. I know I'm wrong about all kinds of stuff. I remember I was wrong about The Cure. Jones told me I was wrong about The Cure. I thought The Cure was stupid. And I listened to it, like, oh, actually, pretty good. I'm not wrong about Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd's dumb. it is, and you're entitled to your opinion. Your opinion's wrong. But the point is that I don't feel like I've somehow lost some sort of battle or being held in a different light because I thought The Cure was stupid. I just saw it differently at one point. I think that like part of truly having an argument, part of truly having an understanding, is not being so precious about the thing you already believe. Now, granted, there are certain things that are completely, I think, that are infallible, and are. I'm not going to waffle on my opinions involving race or my opinions involving a lot of really important stuff that people tend to disagree with about these days. But I'm not going to approach the conversation believing that I am going to be talked out of that. So instead, it's just about explaining, explaining my opinion, explaining as best I possibly can to change somebody else's mind. Those are the topics that are really hard to waffle on. Everything else, everything that doesn't lead to one of those things, you got to be willing to say, yeah, the cure is okay. From things that aren't truly like fundamental apocalyptic. No, this is just the way it is, and I'm sorry that you can't possibly be right. Everything has to be somewhat negotiable, or at least discussable, or else we're literally never ever going to have any common ground ever again. And that's stupid.
I love that conclusion. It's a really interesting one to kind of. I think if I could sum up what we've talked about, it's simply try to have more conversations and fewer arguments.
I love that.
I like it. Do that. Also, keep listening to our podcast.
More specifically, more importantly.
Thanks for hanging out for another one.
Really, really fun, guys. Anytime.
Yeah. Thanks for hopping on, buddy.
Thanks for coming by. Coming by. We're not actually in person this time.
Don't break the fourth wall.
Don't break the fourth wall. Man, that one wore me out. I'm like, I got nothing left. It's good. It's good stuff.
It was really good.
Is it over?
A lot of information.
But thanks for hanging out. I'm Adam.
I'm Brian.
And I'm Mike.
Hooray!
Mr. Rosolio.
They don't know what I know. They don't know.
You're gonna live in a trailer, Malibu, like Riggs in Lethal Weapon.